My husband cheated on me with my own daughter-in-law. I lost everything. My car, my house, my job. He said I would never rise again. Living off favors in a 40 SQFT room, I found a dusty folder with my name on it. Inside, there was 50,000 and a plane ticket to Egypt with a note, "Just go. Your real fortune awaits." When I arrived and saw what was waiting for me, everything changed. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought I'd be standing in my own kitchen at 59 years old, watching my world collapse in real time. The coffee mug slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the ceramic tiles as I stared through the window at the pool house. There they were, my husband of 32 years, Richard, with his hands tangled in my daughter-in-law's hair. Ilara, my son Jasper's wife of 5 years, the woman I'd welcomed into our family, helped plan her wedding, bought Christmas gifts for. The woman who called me Mom and hugged me every Sunday dinner. My legs gave out. I gripped the granite countertop, my knuckles white against the dark stone. This couldn't be real. This had to be some sick nightmare. But the afternoon sun streaming through the window illuminated every horrifying detail. Richard's wedding ring catching the light as his hands roamed over her body. Ilara's laugh drifting through the glass doors. How long had this been happening? How many Sunday dinners had I sat across from them, serving pot roast and asking about their weeks, while they shared this secret? How many times had Ilara hugged me goodbye, her perfume lingering in my nostrils, never knowing it had been on my husband's sheets? I don't know how long I stood there. Time seemed suspended, like those moments before a car crash, when you see it coming but can't move fast enough to stop it. The sound of the pool house door opening snapped me back to reality. They were walking toward the main house. Toward me. I scrambled to clean up the broken mug, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the pieces. Blood dripped from a small cut on my palm, mixing with the spilled coffee on the floor. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was bleeding in my own kitchen while my marriage bled out in the pool house. The back door opened with its familiar squeak. I'd been asking Richard to fix that hinge for months. Paulette? Richard's voice carried that false, casual tone I now recognized. How many lies had been delivered in that same voice? What happened here? I looked up from the floor, still kneeling among the broken ceramic. Ilara stood behind him, her lipstick slightly smeared, her hair mussed. She had the audacity to look concerned. "Oh my God, Mom, are you hurt?" Ilara rushed forward, reaching for my bleeding hand. I jerked away from her touch like she was poison. "Don't call me that." The words came out as a whisper, but they hit, like a slap. Ilara's face crumpled into confusion. Richard's jaw tightened. "Paulette, what's wrong with you?" Richard demanded. "Ilara's just trying to help." I stood slowly, the broken pieces of my favorite mug, the one Jasper had made me in high school pottery class, scattered at my feet. "I saw you." 3 words. That's all it took to change everything. Richard's face went pale, then flushed red. Ilara stepped backward, bumping into the kitchen island. "Saw what?" Richard's voice was different now, harder. The mask was slipping. "In the pool house. I saw you with her." My voice was steadier than I felt. "I saw everything." The silence stretched between us like a canyon. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, marking the seconds of my marriage's death. Ilara started crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears of someone caught in shame, but loud, dramatic sobs. "It's not what you think, Mom. We were just—" "Stop lying to me." The words exploded out of me with a force that surprised us all. "I have eyes, Ilara. I know what I saw." Richard stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he might try to comfort me, apologize, beg for forgiveness. Instead, his face twisted into something I'd never seen before. "So what if you did?" His voice was cold, calculated. "What are you going to do about it?" The question hit me like a physical blow. What was I going to do? I'd never prepared for this moment. In 32 years of marriage, infidelity had never been something I'd worried about. Richard was steady, reliable, boring even. He coached Little League and did crossword puzzles and fell asleep watching the evening news. I'll tell Jasper, I stammered. Ilara's sobs intensified. Please don't. Please, Mom, it will destroy him. You should have thought of that before you destroyed his marriage. Richard laughed. Actually laughed. Tell Jasper? Go ahead. See how that works out for you. There was something in his tone that made my blood run cold. A confidence that suggested he'd already thought this through. What do you mean? I mean, who do you think he'll believe? His loving wife and devoted father, or his bitter, jealous mother who's always been too involved in his relationship? The room spun. Bitter? Jealous? Richard, what are you talking about? Come on, Paulette. We've all seen how you look at Ilara, how you comment on her clothes, her cooking, her housekeeping. You've never thought she was good enough for Jasper. It was like being hit with a bucket of ice water. Yes, I'd had concerns about Ilara. She was young when they married, only 23 to Jasper's 28. She'd never held a job longer than 6 months, but I'd tried to be supportive, to welcome her. That's not... I couldn't form coherent sentences. Face it, Paulette. You're a lonely, middle-aged woman who's jealous of her daughter-in-law's youth and beauty. This fantasy you've cooked up about an affair is just your way of trying to break us apart. Ilara nodded through her tears. I've always felt like you resented me, Mom. But I never thought you'd make up something like this. I felt like I was drowning. The kitchen, my kitchen, where I'd cooked thousands of meals and hosted countless family gatherings, felt like a foreign landscape. These people, my husband and daughter-in-law, were speaking to me like I was a stranger, a disturbed stranger. You're gaslighting me, I whispered. I know what I saw. You saw what you wanted to see, Richard said. Ilara was upset about something, and I was comforting her. If your sick mind turned that into something inappropriate, that's your problem. The front door slammed. Heavy footsteps in the hallway. Jasper was home from work. Hey, everyone. Why does it smell like coffee in here? Jasper's voice carried from the foyer. Mom? Dad? Ilara? I looked at Richard and Ilara, seeing my last chance to tell the truth before they spun their web around my son. But Richard's eyes held a warning that made my blood freeze. In here, honey, Ilara called, wiping her tears and straightening her hair. Your mom had a little accident with her coffee mug. Jasper appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his Navy suit from the law firm where he worked. My son. My baby boy who'd grown into a successful, confident man. The pride of my life. Mom, what happened? Are you bleeding? Before I could answer, Ilara threw herself into his arms. Oh, Jasper, I'm so worried about your mom. She's been acting so strange lately. I watched in horror as Ilara began to cry again, and Jasper's protective instincts kicked in. His arm tightened around his wife as he looked at me with concern. Mom? What's going on? I opened my mouth to tell him everything, to destroy his world the way mine had just been destroyed. But looking at his face, at the love and trust in his eyes as he held his wife, I couldn't find the words. Richard smiled at me over Jasper's shoulder. It was the smile of a predator who'd cornered his prey. That night, as I lay in bed next to the man who'd just torn my life apart, I realized the betrayal was only the beginning. The campaign to destroy me began the very next morning. I woke up to find Richard already dressed, standing by our bedroom window with his phone pressed to his ear. The conversation stopped abruptly when he noticed I was awake. Who are you talking to? I asked, my voice hoarse from a sleepless night. Work, he said without looking at me. Some of us have responsibilities. The dig was subtle but sharp. Richard had always resented that I'd never worked outside the home after Jasper was born. It had been his idea initially. He'd wanted a wife who could focus on the family, attend his business dinners, maintain our social connections. Now, apparently, it was ammunition against me. Over breakfast, the atmosphere was suffocating. Richard read his newspaper in pointed silence while I picked at my toast. When Jasper called to check on me, Alara had clearly expressed her concerns about my mental state. I could hear the worry in his voice. Mom, are you feeling okay? Alara said you seemed really confused yesterday. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Maybe you should see Dr. Martinez. Get a checkup. You know, at your age, sometimes stress can cause episodes. Episodes. My 28-year-old son was suggesting I was having episodes. I wanted to scream that the only episode I'd had was catching his father cheating with his wife, but Richard was watching me from across the kitchen table, his eyes holding that same warning from the night before. I'll think about it, I said instead. The real blow came 3 days later. I was at the grocery store going through my normal routine when my card was declined. I tried again, thinking it was a machine error. Declined again. I'm sorry, ma'am, the teenage cashier said, her voice kind but embarrassed for me. Do you have another card? My face burned as the line behind me grew restless. I tried our joint credit card. Declined. I fumbled through my wallet for cash, coming up with only $16 for a $73 grocery bill. I'll just take these items, I said, pointing to a few essentials that would fit my cash budget. The cart full of food I'd planned to make for the family dinner that Sunday remained abandoned. At home, I tried to access our online banking. Password incorrect. I tried the backup account. Access denied. The savings account I thought was untouchable, my inheritance from my mother that I'd put into our joint portfolio, showed a balance of $0. Richard came home that evening with a manila folder and the satisfied expression of someone who'd been planning this moment for a long time. We need to talk, he said, setting the folder on the kitchen table where just days ago I discovered his betrayal. Inside the folder were divorce papers. Not a rough draft or a discussion starter. Completed official divorce papers with my name already typed in the spaces marked Respondent. You're filing for divorce? I asked, though the evidence was right in front of me. On grounds of mental instability and emotional abuse, Richard said calmly. Alara is prepared to testify about your increasingly erratic behavior and unfounded accusations. Dr. Martinez has already noted in your medical file your recent complaints about memory issues and paranoia. My blood ran cold. What memory issues? What paranoia? I've never complained about any such thing. Your visit last month. You told him you'd been feeling confused, forgetting conversations, worried that people were talking about you behind your back. I remembered that appointment. I'd mentioned feeling scattered because I'd been planning Jasper's birthday party and juggling multiple commitments. I joked about feeling paranoid because our neighbor had been giving me strange looks, which we later discovered was because she had a crush on Richard. You're twisting everything, I whispered. I'm protecting myself and my family from your deteriorating mental state. This obsession with Alara, these wild accusations about an affair, it's textbook paranoid delusion. The worst part was how reasonable he sounded, how concerned. If I didn't know better, I might believe him myself. The house will need to be sold, he continued. My lawyer recommends I maintain residence here during the proceedings to establish custodial continuity. Custodial continuity? Richard, Jasper is 28 years old. Financial custodianship. Given your unstable mental state, it would be irresponsible to leave you with access to substantial assets. That explained the empty bank accounts. Somehow, Richard had moved everything beyond my reach while I was grocery shopping and trying to process the fact that my marriage was over. Where am I supposed to live? That's not my problem anymore. I suggest you contact your sister. My sister lived in Oregon and hadn't spoken to me in 5 years after a disagreement about our mother's funeral arrangements. Even if she would take me in, the thought of crawling to her with this humiliation made my stomach turn. This is all because I caught you with Alara, isn't it? You can't destroy my life because I witnessed your affair. Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw the cold calculation underneath. What affair, Paulette? You keep saying that word, but there were no witnesses to this alleged affair except you. And given your documented mental health issues, the pieces fell into place. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision triggered by getting caught. This had been planned. The moves with the money, the medical documentation, the legal paperwork. Richard had been setting this up for months, maybe longer. How long? I asked. How long what? How long have you been planning this? How long have you been with Alara? His smile was the cruelest thing I'd ever seen. Long enough to know she's everything you never were. I moved out the next week. Jasper helped me pack, his face a mask of forced cheerfulness that broke my heart. He believed his father's story completely. Every time I tried to explain what had really happened, he'd get that concerned look and change the subject. "Mom, maybe this is for the best," he said as we loaded boxes into his car. "You and Dad have been growing apart for years. Maybe you'll both be happier now." "Jasper, there's something you need to know about Alara and your father." "Mom, stop." His voice was sharp, harder than I'd ever heard it. "I can't listen to you attack my wife anymore. It's not healthy." Alara appeared in the doorway, her face the picture of innocent concern. "Jasper, honey, maybe your mom needs some space from the family while she adjusts to this transition." Space from the family. My family. The family I'd devoted 32 years of my life to building and maintaining and nurturing. "That might be a good idea," Jasper agreed. "Just for a while, Mom. Until you're feeling more like yourself." I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him. I wanted to scream that I was feeling exactly like myself. It was everyone else who had changed. But looking at my son's face, at the way he stood protectively close to his wife, I realized I'd already lost him. The apartment I could afford with the small amount of money Richard's lawyer had grudgingly allocated for temporary spousal support was a studio in the worst part of town. 3,800 square feet reduced to 400. A lifetime of belongings condensed to what would fit in a space the size of my former walk-in closet. The first night there, sitting on a mattress on the floor, because I couldn't afford a bed frame, I stared at the water stain on the ceiling and wondered how my life had imploded so completely in less than 2 weeks. The worst part wasn't the tiny apartment or the empty refrigerator or even the divorce papers. The worst part was the silence. No more phone calls from Jasper asking what I was making for Sunday dinner. No more texts from friends who'd apparently decided Richard's version of events was more believable than mine. I'd become invisible, erased, like I'd never existed at all. That's when I started going through the boxes, looking for anything that might remind me that I used to matter to someone. 3 months into my new reality, I developed a routine that kept me functional, if not exactly living. Wake up at 6 in the morning, instant coffee and whatever was on sale at the dollar store. Job applications until noon, though at 59 with no recent work experience, the rejections came like clockwork. Afternoons were for walking, because walking was free and got me out of the suffocating studio apartment. The walls seemed to close in more each day. 400 square feet wasn't meant for a lifetime of possessions, and I'd been ruthless in my downsizing. Still, boxes lined every available wall space, labeled in my careful handwriting, kitchen items, books, Jasper's childhood, photo albums. I'd been avoiding that last box. Photo albums felt like archaeological evidence of a life that no longer existed. But on this particular gray Tuesday morning, with nowhere to go and nothing to do, I finally pulled it down from the top of my makeshift dresser. The first album was our wedding. Richard looked so young, so earnest in his rented tuxedo. I looked radiant in my mother's altered wedding dress, believing with every fiber of my being that we were starting forever together. The irony was suffocating. Deeper in the box, I found albums from Jasper's childhood. His first steps, captured in a series of blurry photos because my hands were shaking with excitement. His kindergarten graduation, where he'd insisted on wearing his Batman cape over his tiny cap and gown. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper explosions and his gap-toothed grins. Richard was in most of these photos, but he looked like a stranger now. Had I imagined the love in his eyes when he looked at our son? Had I projected my own feelings onto his face? Or had something fundamental changed in him over the years, turning the man I married into someone capable of such calculated cruelty? At the bottom of the box, wedged between 2 photo albums, was a manila folder I didn't recognize. It was old, yellowed at the edges, and written across the front in faded blue ink was my maiden name, Paulette Morrison. I stared at it for a long moment. I hadn't been Paulette Morrison in over 30 years. Who would have a folder with that name? And how had it ended up in my possessions? Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Legal papers in my Aunt Catherine's handwriting, my mother's sister who died 15 years ago. Catherine had been the family adventurer, the one who'd never married, who'd traveled the world and sent postcards from exotic locations. She died alone in Cairo, Egypt, where she'd been living for the last 20 years of her life. The first document was a letter dated just 6 months before Catherine's death, addressed to me but never mailed. My dearest Paulette, it began in Catherine's distinctive handwriting. If you're reading this, it means you've found yourself in circumstances that require what I like to call an emergency exit from your current life. I've always suspected that Richard wasn't the man you thought he was, and I've prepared for the possibility that you might one day need to escape. My hands started shaking. How had Catherine known? How had she seen what I'd missed for 32 years? I've been living in Cairo for 2 decades now, and it's given me perspective on family, on marriage, on what really matters. I've also been quite successful in my business ventures here, more successful than our family back home ever knew. The traditional American life you've built is wonderful if it's genuine, but if it's not, it becomes a beautiful prison. I had to stop reading. Catherine's words were like a punch to the gut, describing my marriage with an accuracy that was almost supernatural. How had she known I was living in a beautiful prison when I hadn't even known it myself? I've set aside resources for you, my dear niece, not because I expected you to need them, but because I wanted you to have options. Real options. The kind of freedom that only comes when you have the power to walk away from anything that doesn't serve your highest good. Attached to the letter were bank statements from a Cairo bank, showing an account in my maiden name with a balance that made me gasp. $50,000. Money that Catherine had been depositing regularly for the past 10 years, money I'd never known existed. But that wasn't all. There were property deeds, actual property deeds, for an apartment in Cairo's historic district. Photos showed a beautiful space with high ceilings, intricate tile work, and windows that overlooked the Nile. Below the photos was a note, "Your sanctuary awaits." At the bottom of the folder was an envelope marked, "Open only if you're ready to begin again." Inside was a plane ticket to Cairo, dated for the following week, and a simple note, "Just go, your real fortune awaits." I sat on my mattress on the floor, surrounded by the ruins of my old life, holding what felt like the key to a completely new one. Catherine had somehow predicted my downfall and prepared a way out that Richard couldn't touch, couldn't steal, couldn't manipulate, but it felt impossible. I was 59 years old, broke, emotionally shattered. How could I just fly to Egypt and start over? What about Jasper? What if he needed me? What if he finally realized the truth about his father and came looking for his mother? Then I remembered his last words to me. Maybe you need some space from the family while you adjust to this transition. Space from the family. My own son suggesting I was the problem that needed to be removed from the equation. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Jasper's number. We hadn't spoken in 6 weeks. Our last conversation had ended with him hanging up on me when I tried once more to tell him the truth about Ilara and Richard. I pressed call, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Mom?" He sounded surprised, maybe even annoyed. "Is everything okay?" "I wanted to hear your voice," I said, trying to keep the emotion out of my tone. "How are you? How's work?" "Fine. Everything's fine. Look, Mom, I'm actually in a meeting. Can I call you back later?" It was 7 in the evening. What kind of meeting happened at 7 in the evening? "Of course, sweetheart, I love you." A pause. "Love you too, Mom." But his voice was distant, distracted, like I was an obligation he needed to check off his list. He didn't call back. That night I lay on my mattress staring at the plane ticket. The departure date was in 5 days. 5 days to decide whether to stay in the studio apartment, drowning in my old life's wreckage, or take Catherine's gift and discover what my real fortune might be. I thought about Richard, probably sleeping comfortably in our old bed next to Alara. I thought about Jasper, convinced that his mother was mentally unstable and his father was protecting the family from my delusions. I thought about the friends who'd believed Richard's story without even asking for mine. I thought about the job applications that would never be answered, because who wants to hire a 59-year-old woman with no recent experience and a messy divorce? Then I thought about Catherine, who'd seen through Richard's facade from the beginning, who'd lived independently in a foreign country for 20 years, who'd built a life on her own terms and wanted to give me the chance to do the same. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called a taxi. "Where to?" the driver asked. I clutched Catherine's folder against my chest. "The passport office. I have a trip to plan." As we pulled away from my building, I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. For the first time in months, my eyes weren't empty. There was something there I'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. The first thing that hit me stepping off the plane at Cairo International Airport was the heat. Not the dry, manageable heat I'd expected, but a living, breathing wall of humidity that made my clothes stick to my skin instantly. The second thing was the smell, a mixture of spices, exhaust, and something indefinably ancient that seemed to rise from the very ground. I stood in the terminal, clutching Catherine's folder like a lifeline, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I'd done. 48 hours ago, I'd been eating ramen noodles in a studio apartment, and now I was halfway around the world in a country where I didn't speak the language or understand the customs. The customs officer looked at my passport with mild interest. "First time in Egypt?" "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Business or pleasure?" I thought about that question for a moment. What was this? "Starting over," I said finally. He smiled and stamped my passport. "Welcome to Egypt, Mrs. Morrison." Mrs. Morrison. I hadn't heard that name in 32 years. It felt like putting on clothes that used to fit perfectly, but had been packed away so long I'd forgotten how they felt. According to Catherine's instructions, someone would be waiting for me outside customs with a sign bearing my maiden name. I scanned the crowd of taxi drivers and tour guides holding handwritten signs, feeling lost and conspicuous in my American clothes and obvious tourist confusion. Then I saw it. Paulette Morrison, written in careful English letters, held by a woman who looked to be about my age. She was elegant in a way that seemed effortless, wearing a flowing dress that somehow looked both modern and timeless. Her gray streaked hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and when our eyes met, her face broke into a warm smile. "Paulette," she said, approaching me with outstretched arms. "I'm Amira. Catherine told me so much about you." The embrace was unexpected and overwhelming. When was the last time someone had hugged me with genuine warmth? When was the last time someone had looked at me like I was someone worth waiting for? "Catherine told you about me?" I asked as we made our way through the airport. "Oh, yes. She spoke of you often, especially in her last years. She was so proud of the woman you'd become, but she worried about the life you'd built. She used to say that you were too good for your own good, that your kindness would be taken advantage of by people who didn't deserve it." The accuracy of Catherine's assessment was startling. How had she seen so clearly from thousands of miles away what I'd been blind to living right in the middle of it? "She left very specific instructions for if you ever came to Cairo," Amira continued as we climbed into her car. "She wanted me to take care of you, to help you settle in. She said you might arrive broken, but that Egypt has a way of healing broken things." The drive through Cairo was overwhelming sensory chaos. Cars seemed to follow no rules I could discern, weaving between lanes while honking constantly. Street vendors called out in Arabic, their carts loaded with fruits and vegetables I didn't recognize. Ancient buildings stood next to modern ones in a tapestry that spoke of thousands of years of continuous civilization. "It's a lot," Amira said, noticing my wide-eyed stare. "But you'll learn to love it. Cairo doesn't reveal herself quickly, but when she does, she gets into your blood." We stopped in front of a building that looked like it belonged in a movie about exotic adventures. The facade was cream-colored stone with intricate carved details around tall windows. Iron balconies jutted out from the second and third floors, and I could see the Nile sparkling in the distance. "This is yours," Amira said simply. Mine? The word felt foreign in my mouth. Catherine bought this building 20 years ago. She lived on the top floor and rented out the others. The income has been going into your account all this time. She wanted you to have financial independence if you ever needed it. She handed me an ornate key that looked like it belonged to a jewelry box. The top floor, Catherine's apartment. Your apartment now. The building had an ancient elevator with a gate that had to be manually closed. As we rose to the third floor, my heart hammered against my ribs. What would I find in Catherine's space? What kind of life had she built here? The apartment door opened to reveal something that took my breath away. High ceilings with exposed wooden beams. Windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, draped in gauzy white curtains that moved gently in the breeze from the Nile. The furniture was an eclectic mix of antiques and comfortable modern pieces, creating a space that felt both sophisticated and welcoming. But it was the walls that made me gasp. They were covered with photographs, not of tourist attractions or famous landmarks, but of people. Egyptians of all ages, all walks of life. Children playing in the streets, elderly men playing backgammon in cafes, women at markets selecting vegetables with the intensity of art connoisseurs. Catherine was a photographer, Amira explained. She said that most Americans who come to Egypt see the pyramids and the museums, but they never see the heart of the country. She spent 20 years capturing that heart. In the bedroom, on the nightstand next to a bed covered in rich fabrics, was another letter with my name on it. "Welcome home, my dear Paulette," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you found the courage to leave a life that wasn't serving you and step into the unknown. I'm proud of you for that courage. It's something I didn't find until I was 63 years old." The letter went on to explain practical details. The building manager, Hassan, who lived on the first floor, the bank where my account was waiting, the photography studio space Catherine had set up in the building's basement, complete with darkroom equipment and years' worth of supplies. But most importantly, the letter continued, "I want you to know that this isn't charity or pity. This is investment in a woman I always believed was capable of extraordinary things. You just needed the right circumstances to discover that for yourself." At the bottom was a postscript that made me cry. Stop trying to earn love from people who aren't capable of giving it. Start giving that love to yourself. That evening, Amira took me to a small restaurant overlooking the Nile. The owner, a man named Omar, greeted her like family and immediately began bringing plates of food I'd never seen before. Tender lamb with spices that seemed to dance on my tongue. Vegetables prepared with combinations of herbs that made them taste like entirely new foods. Bread that was still warm from the oven. Catherine used to say that you can't properly start a new life on an empty stomach, Amira said, watching me eat with obvious pleasure. How did she know? I asked between bites. How did Catherine know that my marriage was falling apart before I knew it myself? Amira was quiet for a moment, sipping her tea. She recognized the signs because she'd lived them. Catherine was married once, you know, back in America before she came here. Her husband was charming, successful, respected in their community. He was also a master manipulator who slowly convinced her that she was lucky to be married to him, that no one else would want her, that every problem in their relationship was her fault. I set down my fork, suddenly understanding. She left him when she was 63, lost everything, house, friends, social standing. She came to Egypt with nothing but a suitcase and a small inheritance from her mother. She rebuilt her entire life from scratch in a foreign country where she didn't speak the language. And she was happy here? Amira smiled. She was free here. And freedom, she used to say, is just another word for happiness. As we walked back to my building along the Nile, the city lights reflecting on the water like scattered jewels, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of possibility. "Tomorrow," Amira said as we stood in front of my building, "Hassan will show you around the neighborhood. Help you get oriented, but tonight just rest. Let Egypt begin to work her magic." In my new bedroom, lying in Catherine's bed that was now mine, I called Jasper one last time. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom. I'm calling to let you know that I'm okay. More than okay, actually. I'm starting a new chapter of my life, and I want you to know that I love you. I'll always love you. If you ever want to find me, I'll be here." I gave him Amira's phone number and hung up. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up in a panic about my future. Because for the first time in months, I had one. 6 months in Cairo had transformed me in ways I never could have imagined. The woman who'd fled America broken and desperate was becoming someone I barely recognized. Someone stronger, more confident, more alive. I'd taken up Catherine's photography, spending my mornings walking through the ancient streets capturing the faces and stories of my new home. The afternoon light through my apartment windows had become my favorite time to develop film in Catherine's darkroom. But it was the evenings that brought the most unexpected pleasure. Hassan, the building manager, had introduced me to his extended family network, and somehow I'd become the honorary aunt to what felt like half of Cairo. Children would run up to me in the market calling Tante Paulette, and their mothers would invite me for tea and gossip in a mixture of Arabic and English that had become my new favorite language. I was developing photos from a recent trip to the Khan El Khalili Bazaar when my phone rang. The number was American, but not one I recognized. "Hello? Mrs. Morrison, this is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh & Associates. I'm calling about your property in Sacramento." My blood ran cold. The house? My former house that Richard had been so eager to sell during our divorce proceedings. "What about it?" "We represent the current owners, and they're interested in selling. During the property inspection, we discovered some irregularities with the title that require your signature to resolve. As the previous owner, you have certain rights that need to be addressed." I sat down heavily in Catherine's reading chair. "What kind of irregularities?" "It appears the property was transferred without proper documentation of certain improvements made during your ownership. The buyers are questioning the legitimacy of the sale. This could potentially void their purchase agreement unless we can get proper documentation." The improvements, the renovations I paid for with my mother's inheritance money. The money Richard had claimed was family money during the divorce, but had somehow failed to properly document when he'd sold the house. What would happen if the sale was voided? The property would revert to its previous ownership status. Given the circumstances of the original sale, you might have grounds to reclaim partial ownership. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my Cairo apartment, watching the sun set over the Nile. Richard had made a mistake. In his eagerness to erase me from his life and cash in on our shared assets, he'd cut corners with the legal paperwork. Now it was coming back to haunt him. I called the lawyer back the next morning. "I want to pursue this," I told her. "Whatever rights I have, I want to exercise them." 3 weeks later, I received a frantic call from Jasper. It was the first time we'd spoken since I'd left the country. "Mom, where are you? Dad says you're causing problems with the house sale. He says you're trying to steal money from them." "I'm in Cairo," I said calmly. "And I'm not stealing anything. I'm reclaiming what was taken from me illegally." "Cairo? What are you doing in Cairo?" For a moment, I heard my little boy in his voice, the confusion and worry that used to break my heart when he had nightmares. But I wasn't the same woman who would have dropped everything to rush home and fix his problems. "I'm living, Jasper. Really living for the first time in 30 years. This is crazy, Mom. You can't just run away to Egypt and then try to destroy Dad's life from over there." "Is that what he told you? That I'm trying to destroy his life?" "Aren't you?" The question hung between us across continents and time zones. Was I trying to destroy Richard's life, or was I simply refusing to let him destroy mine completely? Your father sold a house that I helped pay for, using money that belonged to me without properly documenting my contributions. Now the legal system is catching up with his shortcuts. I'm not destroying anything. I'm allowing the truth to surface. "Mom, please. Ilara's pregnant. They can't handle this kind of stress right now." Ilara was pregnant. The woman who'd stolen my husband was carrying what should have been my grandchild. The irony was suffocating. "Congratulations," I managed to say. "You're going to be a wonderful father." "Don't change the subject. Will you drop this house thing?" "Please?" I looked around my Cairo apartment at the photographs I'd taken covering the walls, at the life I'd built from nothing, at the strength I'd found in myself that I never knew existed. No, Jasper, I won't. The legal proceedings moved slowly but inevitably. Richard had indeed failed to properly document my contributions to the house improvements, and the new buyers were threatening to sue him for misrepresentation. The title company was requiring him to either buy out my interest or face a complete reversal of the sale. I learned all this through my American lawyer, who called with regular updates that I listened to while sipping tea on my balcony, overlooking the Nile. He's trying to negotiate a settlement, she told me during one call. $50,000 to release all claims. What do you think the property is actually worth? With the improvements you funded, your share would be closer to $120,000. Then we wait. Mrs. Morrison, I should tell you that your ex-husband's attorney is suggesting you're doing this out of spite, that you're trying to hurt him because of the divorce. I laughed, surprising myself with how genuine it sounded. Maybe I am. Does that make my claim less legal? Not at all. Legal is legal, regardless of motivation. The settlement offers kept coming. $60,000, $75,000. Each time I told my lawyer to decline. Not because I needed the money, Catherine's legacy had made me financially independent, but because Richard needed to learn that his actions had consequences. The final call came on a Thursday evening while I was having dinner with Amira and her family. My phone buzzed with the international ringtone I'd learned to recognize. Mrs. Morrison? It's Jennifer Walsh. He's agreed to the full amount, $120,000. He wants to close this as quickly as possible. I looked around the dinner table at these people who'd become my chosen family. Amira's granddaughter was practicing her English with me, proudly showing off new vocabulary words she'd learned in school. Her son was explaining his plans to expand his spice shop to include a small cafe. This was my life now, full of warmth and possibility and people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. Accept it, I told the lawyer. Later that evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the endless flow of the Nile, my phone rang again. This time it was Jasper. Dad had to liquidate part of his retirement account to pay you, he said without preamble. He's 62 years old, Mom. You might have cost him his ability to retire. He cost himself that when he chose to steal from me, I replied. I didn't create the situation, Jasper. I just refused to pretend it didn't happen. So this is who you are now? Someone who hurts people for revenge? I considered his question seriously. Was this revenge? Or was it simply justice? Was there a difference? This is who I've always been underneath, I said finally. Someone who knows her own worth. Your father spent 32 years convincing me I didn't have any value beyond what I could do for him. It took losing everything to remember that wasn't true. I don't understand you anymore. I know, but I understand myself now, and that's enough. After we hung up, I sat in the warm Cairo night air, thinking about the woman I used to be, the one who would have forgiven Richard's theft, who would have signed whatever papers he wanted just to keep the peace, who would have sacrificed her own justice to maintain relationships with people who didn't respect her anyway. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who knew that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to accept less than you deserve. The money would arrive in my Cairo account within the week. I already knew what I wanted to do with it. Expand Catherine's photography studio, maybe start teaching workshops for other expatriate women who were rebuilding their lives in Egypt. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was the knowledge that Richard's perfect new life with Ilara had a crack in it now, a crack that reminded him every day that his actions had consequences, that the woman he'd discarded wasn't as powerless as he'd believed. He'd spent months trying to erase me from his story, but some marks can't be erased. Some debts always come due. 2 years had passed since I'd arrived in Cairo with nothing but a mysterious folder and a heart full of broken dreams. Now, standing in the gallery space I'd created on the ground floor of my building, surrounded by my photographs of Egyptian life and the faces of women who'd found strength they never knew they possessed, I barely recognized the woman I used to be. The exhibition was called Invisible Women, portraits of females across Cairo who'd rebuilt their lives after loss, divorce, widowhood, abandonment, betrayal, Each photograph told a story of resilience, and somehow my own story had become woven into the collection without me even realizing it. "This one is my favorite," said Margaret, a British woman in her 60s, who'd become part of our expatriate community after her husband left her for a younger colleague. She was pointing to a photograph of Fatima, a 70-year-old Egyptian grandmother who'd started her own business selling homemade jewelry after her children moved abroad and stopped sending money. "She reminds me of someone," I said, smiling. Fatima reminded me of myself. Not the woman I'd been in America, but the woman I'd discovered I could be when everything familiar was stripped away. The opening reception was more successful than I'd dared hope. Local Egyptians mixed with expatriates, art collectors chatted with curious neighbors, and several pieces had already sold. But the real validation came from the women whose stories I'd captured. They stood proudly next to their portraits, many bringing their families to see how they'd been honored. As the evening wound down, I was cleaning up when Hassan approached me with an unusual expression on his face. "Madame Paulette, there is someone here who says she knows you. An American woman." My heart stopped. Only a handful of people knew where I was, and none of them were planning to visit. I followed Hassan to the entrance where a familiar figure stood silhouetted against the Cairo streetlights. Ilara. She looked different from the confident young woman who'd stolen my husband. Older, obviously pregnant now, but there was something else. A heaviness around her eyes that spoke of disillusionment. "Hello, Paulette," she said quietly. "What are you doing here?" I asked, though I kept my voice neutral. This was my space, my sanctuary, and I wouldn't let her bring drama into it. "I needed to see you, to talk to you." "About what?" She looked around the gallery, taking in the photographs, the evidence of the life I'd built. "About everything." I considered sending her away. 2 years ago, I would have been shattered by her presence, destroyed by the reminder of everything she'd taken from me. But looking at her now, I felt nothing but mild curiosity. "There's a cafe down the street," I said finally. "We can talk there." The cafe was nearly empty at this hour. We sat at a small table overlooking the Nile, the same river that had become my daily meditation, my reminder that some things endure while others pass away. "You look good," Ilara said, and there was genuine surprise in her voice. "Happy." "I am happy." I thought, "Richard said you'd fallen apart after the divorce, that you were barely surviving." I poured tea from the pot the waiter had brought, taking my time with the ritual. "Richard says many things that aren't true. You should know that better than anyone by now." Ilara's face crumpled slightly. "That's why I'm here." I waited. I'd learned patience in Cairo, learned the value of silence in drawing out truth. "He's not who I thought he was," she said finally. "The man I fell in love with, the one who made me feel special and chosen, that was an act. After you left, after the divorce was final, he changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. What do you mean?" "He controls everything. Where I go, who I see, what I wear. He monitors my phone, my email. He tells me it's because he loves me, because he wants to protect me, but—" She touched her pregnant belly. "I'm having his baby, and I feel like I'm disappearing." The irony was staggering. Ilara had helped Richard destroy my life, and now she was discovering that the man she'd won was a prize no one should want. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want to know how you did it, how you survived losing everything, how you rebuilt." I studied her face, seeing myself from 3 years ago, trapped, confused, wondering if the problems in my relationship were all my fault. But there was a crucial difference. I'd been naive. Ilara had been complicit. "I found out who I was when everything I thought defined me was taken away," I said finally. "I discovered that I was never the problem. I was just the convenient target." "He made me believe you were bitter and jealous, that you were trying to break us up because you couldn't stand to see him happy. And now? Now I think you were trying to warn me." I sipped my tea, remembering those desperate attempts to tell Jasper the truth, the way my words had been twisted into evidence of my mental instability. "What are you going to do?" I asked. I don't know. I'm pregnant. I have no money of my own, no job skills. He made sure I was dependent on him for everything. She looked at me with something approaching desperation. How did you find the courage to leave? The question took me back to that moment in my studio apartment, holding Catherine's plane ticket and choosing the unknown over the familiar misery. I realized that being alone and free was better than being together and imprisoned. But Alara, you have to understand something. I can't save you. You have to save yourself. I know, I needed to see that it was possible, that someone could lose everything and still survive. We sat in silence for a while, watching boats move along the Nile. Finally, Alara spoke again. Jasper doesn't know I'm here. He still believes Richard's version of everything. He thinks you're the villain in this story. The mention of my son still caused a small ache in my chest, but it was manageable now, like a scar that no longer hurts but never quite disappears. Jasper will figure out the truth eventually, I said. Or he won't. Either way, I can't control it. Don't you miss him? Every day. But I've learned the difference between loving someone and enabling their choices. I love my son enough to let him make his own mistakes. Alara pulled out her phone and showed me a recent photo. Jasper at what looked like a family barbecue, his arm around her, Richard beside them both. They looked like the perfect family. Successful, attractive, content. We're not happy, she said quietly. None of us. Richard controls Jasper almost as much as he controls me. He's isolated him from his friends, convinced him that family is the only thing that matters. Jasper can't make a decision without asking Richard's opinion first. I looked at the photo, seeing my son's smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and felt a deep sadness for the man he'd become. But it was grief for his choices, not guilt for mine. I have to go, Alara said, standing abruptly. He thinks I'm at a doctor's appointment. He times everything. She paused at the cafe entrance, looking back at me one last time. I'm sorry, she said, for everything, for not believing you, for helping him destroy your life. Your apology doesn't change what happened, I said gently, but it might help you figure out what happens next. After she left, I walked back to my gallery alone. The photographs of strong women looked down at me from the walls, reminders of the resilience that exists in all of us when we're brave enough to claim it. My phone buzzed with a text from Amira. How did the opening go? Are you celebrating? I looked around my space, my sanctuary, my proof that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Yes, I texted back. I'm celebrating. 6 months later, I received a postcard from Jasper. Not a letter, not a phone call, just a simple postcard with a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge. Mom, I'm in San Francisco. Started my own practice. Would like to visit if you're open to it. Love, Jay. I held the postcard for a long time, feeling the weight of possibility in those few words. Jasper had left Sacramento, left Richard, found his own way. Maybe Alara had found her courage too. Maybe she'd given him permission to see the truth he'd been avoiding, or maybe he'd simply grown tired of living someone else's life. Either way, I wrote back on a postcard featuring the pyramids at sunset. You're always welcome here. This is where broken things come to heal. 3 years after losing everything, I'd gained something far more valuable, the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. I'd learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to the best thing that was waiting for you. I'd learned that home isn't a place or a person. It's the peace you feel when you're finally living as yourself. And sitting on my balcony that evening, watching the Nile flow toward the Mediterranean, carrying away the day's worries and tomorrow's possibilities, I knew I was finally, completely, gloriously home. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.